Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Sleep Stories TV. Tonight we dive deeper into our Greek mythology series with Perseus and Medusa's Curse: A Hero's Quest, the seventh chapter of our journey. A demigod rises armed with divine gifts to face a monster's deadly gaze. The threads of fate tighten and courage lights the way. If you haven't subscribed to Sleep Stories TV, join us now. Tap that bell to never miss a story. Now settle in and let's step into the myth where bravery meets destiny and a hero's legend is born. Our story begins not with a hero, but with a king haunted by fear, Perseus, king of Argos, who received a prophecy that he would be killed by his own grandson. In the shadowed halls of his palace, where torchlight flickered against cold stone, Perseus paced restlessly, his mind ensnared by the words of the oracle of Delphi. The seer's voice had been clear, her eyes clouded with visions of fate, as she spoke of a child yet unborn who would bring about his doom. Perseus, a man of power and pride, could not bear the thought of his lineage turning against him. Argos was his kingdom, its walls strong, its people loyal, yet no amount of gold or might could shield him from the gods' decree. The prophecy gnawed at him, a relentless specter that followed him through every feast, every council, every sleepless night. He saw threats in every shadow, heard whispers of betrayal in the wind. His daughter Danae, his only child, became the focal point of his dread. She was young, radiant with eyes that held the warmth of the sun, and a spirit untouched by the weight of her father's crown. Yet to Perseus she was no longer just a daughter, but a vessel of his destruction. How could a child born of her bring about his end? The question tormented him, twisting his love for her soul into something darker, something born of desperation. Perseus was not a man to sit idly by while fate closed in. He summoned his advisors, men with gray beards and furrowed brows, and demanded solutions. They spoke of offerings to appease the gods, of sacrifices to divert the prophecy. But Perseus dismissed their words. The gods, he knew, were not so easily swayed. Instead, he turned to measures more immediate, more tangible. If Danae were to bear a son, that son would be his undoing. The solution then was to ensure no child could be born. He ordered the construction of a chamber, not of comfort, but of confinement, a prison forged of bronze and buried deep beneath the earth. The walls were smooth, unyielding, designed to keep out the world and its temptations. No windows allowed the light of day. No doors permitted escape. Danae, bewildered and heartbroken, was led into this subterranean cell, her father's voice cold, as he explained it was for her protection. Protection from what he would not say. She was allowed no visitors, no companions, save for a single servant who brought her food and water through a narrow slot. The air was heavy, the silence oppressive, and Danae's world shrank to the confines of her bronze cage. Yet even as Perseus sealed her away, he could not shake the oracle's words. Fate, he would learn, was not so easily thwarted. The people of Argos whispered of their king's cruelty, though none dared speak openly. Danae was beloved, her laughter once a fixture in the palace gardens, her kindness known to all. Now she was gone, hidden away like a treasure too dangerous to display. Perseus justified his actions to himself, claiming it was for the good of the kingdom. A king's duty was to protect his people even from himself. But in his heart fear ruled, not duty. He avoided the place where Danae was kept, unable to face the daughter he had betrayed. Instead, he threw himself into the affairs of Argos, fortifying its walls, expanding its trade as if prosperity could drown out the prophecy's echo. Yet the gods watched their plans unfolding beyond mortal sight. Zeus, king of the heavens, had taken notice of Danae's plight. Her beauty, her resilience in the face of her father's cruelty, stirred something in the god's immortal heart. Acrisius had built a chamber to defy fate, but no mortal craft could bar the will of the divine. The prophecy, far from being undone, was only beginning to weave its intricate threads, pulling Acrisius Danae and the unborn Perseus into a tale that would echo through the ages. This act of imprisonment set the stage for all that followed. Acrisius, in his attempt to outrun destiny, had instead invited its arrival. Danae's confinement was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a greater one, a saga of gods and monsters, of courage and sacrifice. The bronze chamber meant to sever her from the world would instead become the cradle of a hero. Acrisius's fear had birthed the very circumstances he sought to prevent, for the gods do not bow to mortal schemes. As the king sat upon his throne, unaware of the forces gathering beyond his control, the prophecy's shadow loomed larger, its fulfillment drawing ever closer. The stage was set, the players chosen, and the tale of Perseus, the demigod, who would face the Gorgon, was about to unfold. To prevent destiny, Acrisius imprisoned his only daughter, Danae, in a bronze chamber underground. But he did not know that no walls can keep out the king of the gods. The chamber was a marvel of craftsmanship, its bronze walls polished to a cold gleam, sealed so tightly that not even a whisper of the outside world could penetrate. Deep beneath the palace of Argos, it lay hidden, a tomb for the living, where Danae sat alone, her days marked only by the flickering of a single oil lamp. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of metal and earth, and the silence pressed against her like a physical weight. She was young, barely past her girlhood, with hair that caught the lamplight like spun gold, and eyes that still held a spark of defiance despite her father's betrayal. Acrisius had told her this was for her safety, but the lie hung heavy in her heart. She sang soft songs to herself, tales of heroes and gods she had heard as a child, her voice echoing faintly off the unyielding walls. The servant who brought her food spoke little, her eyes downcast as if afraid to meet Danae's gaze. Yet even in this isolation, Danae felt a strange certainty, a quiet strength that told her she was not forsaken. The gods, she whispered in her prayers, were watching. High above, on the cloud-wreathed peaks of Mount Olympus, Zeus, the all-seeing, the thunderer, gazed down upon the mortal world. His eyes, sharp as lightning, fell upon the bronze prison and the woman within. Danae's beauty was not merely in her form, but in her spirit, unbroken, despite her father's cruelty. Zeus, whose heart was as vast as the heavens and as fickle as the winds, felt a stirring of desire. No mortal barrier could thwart his will, no lock withstand his power. Acrisius had built his chamber to defy fate, but in doing so he had drawn the attention of the divine. One night, as Danae slept on her simple pallet, a soft light filled the chamber. Not the harsh glow of the lamp, but something warmer, something alive. The air shimmered, and a cascade of golden motes, like a shower of sunlight, poured through the ceiling, untouched by the bronze that held her. Danae awoke, her breath catching, as the light coalesced, taking no form but filling the room with a presence that was both vast and intimate. Zeus, king of the gods, had come to her not in his divine splendor, but as a radiant force, gentle yet undeniable. She felt no fear, only wonder, as the golden light enveloped her, a warmth that spoke of promises beyond mortal understanding. Their union was brief, a moment of divine communion that left Danae forever changed. The golden shower faded, leaving the chamber dim once more, but within her a spark of life had been kindled. Months passed in the unchanging gloom of her prison, and Danae's body began to show the signs of her pregnancy. She hid it as long as she could, fearing the servant's eyes, but the truth could not be concealed forever. When the child was born, a boy with eyes as bright as his mother's, and a cry that pierced the silence. Danae named him Perseus, meaning the destroyer, as if she sensed the destiny that awaited him. She cradled him in secret, singing the same songs she had once sung to herself, now for her son. The servant, loyal but fearful, kept silent, but whispers reached Acrisius's ears. When he descended to the chamber, his face pale with dread, he saw the child in Danae's arms and knew the prophecy was unfolding. His rage was tempered by terror, for this was no ordinary child. The air in the chamber seemed charged, as if the gods themselves lingered there, mocking his efforts to outwit them. Acrisius could not bring himself to harm the child directly, not when the blood of a god might run in his veins. Instead, he devised a plan to rid himself of both mother and son without staining his hands with their blood. The bronze chamber had failed him, but the sea, vast and merciless, might succeed where walls could not. Danae's imprisonment had been meant to sever her from the world, to stop the prophecy in its tracks, but instead it had invited the divine into her life. Zeus's intervention had turned Acrisius's scheme against him, setting the stage for Perseus's birth and the hero's journey to come. As Danae held her son close, unaware of the trials that awaited them, the threads of fate tightened, weaving a story that would echo through the ages. The bronze chamber, meant to be her tomb, had instead become the crucible where a demigod was born, and the prophecy Acrisius feared was now a living, breathing reality. Upon discovering his grandson Perseus, a horrified Acrisius placed his daughter and the infant in a wooden chest and cast them out to sea, abandoning them to fate. The moment he laid eyes on the child swaddled in Danae's arms within the bronze chamber, Acrisius felt the weight of the oracle's prophecy crash over him like a wave. The boy's bright eyes, so like his mother's, seemed to pierce through the king's defenses, mocking his attempts to defy the gods. Perseus, barely a month old, was no ordinary infant. The air around him seemed to hum with a quiet power, as if the divine spark of his father Zeus lingered still. Acrisius's heart pounded, his hands trembled, and his mind raced with the implications. To kill the child outright would be to invite the wrath of the gods, for who could say what divine blood coursed through those tiny veins? Yet to let him live was to court his own doom. The king's fear, once a gnawing whisper, now roared in his ears, drowning out reason. He paced the halls of his palace, the torches casting long shadows that seemed to writhe like serpents, each one a reminder of the fate he could not escape. His advisors, summoned in haste, offered no solutions, their faces pale with the knowledge that their king stood on the edge of sacrilege. Acrisius, driven by desperation, devised a plan that would spare his hands the stain of blood. While ridding him of the threat, he would let the sea, vast and indifferent, decide their fate. The chest was crafted in secret under the cover of night by artisans sworn to silence. It was a simple thing made of sturdy oak sealed with pitch to keep out the water, but unadorned as if to hide the sin it would carry. Danae, when told of her fate, did not weep or beg. She stood tall, her son clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes blazing with a defiance that made Acrisius turn away. She had endured the bronze chamber, the loneliness, the betrayal of her father's love, and now she faced this new exile with the same unyielding spirit. The soldiers who carried the chest to the shore moved quickly, their faces averted, as if unwilling to meet her gaze. The night was moonless, the sea a dark expanse that stretched endlessly before them, its waves whispering secrets of the deep. Danae was placed inside the chest with Perseus, a few scraps of bread, and a skin of water, their only provisions. As the lid closed, shutting out the world, she whispered to her son, her voice steady despite the darkness. "The gods see us, Perseus," she said, her words a prayer and a promise. "They will not abandon us." The chest was pushed into the surf, the waves lapping eagerly at its sides, and with a final shove it was set adrift, a fragile speck against the vastness of the sea. The currents carried them far from Argos, through nights and days that blurred into one another within the confines of the chest. Danae held Perseus close, shielding him from the rocking of the waves, her songs a soft counterpoint to the creaking wood. The sea was both their prison and their hope, a force that could destroy or deliver them. She spoke to her son of the world beyond, of green hills and golden sunlight, of heroes who faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. Perseus, too young to understand, nestled against her, his tiny hands grasping at her fingers. The gods, it seemed, had not forgotten them. Poseidon, lord of the seas, guided the chest through storms that should have shattered it past jagged rocks that loomed like teeth in the darkness. After days of drifting, the chest came to rest on the shores of Seriphos, a small island kissed by the sun and fringed with white sands. It was here that Dictys, a fisherman with kind eyes and weathered hands, found them. He had been casting his nets at dawn when he saw the chest bobbing in the shallows, its wood scarred but intact. With the help of his neighbors, he dragged it ashore, prying open the lid to reveal Danae and her child, weary but alive. Dictys took them into his home, a humble dwelling of stone and driftwood, where the scent of salt and fish mingled with the warmth of a hearth. He offered them food, shelter, and a kindness that Danae had almost forgotten existed. For years they lived in peace on Seriphos, far from the shadow of Acrisius's fear. Danae raised Perseus in the fisherman's care, teaching him the stories of gods and heroes, while Dictys showed him the ways of the sea. The boy grew strong, his laughter echoing across the beaches, his eyes always turned to the horizon, as if sensing the destiny that awaited him. But this peace was fragile, a fleeting gift in a world governed by fate. The island's king, Polydectes, Dictys's cruel brother, would soon cast his own shadow over their lives, setting in motion the next chapter of Perseus's journey. Acrisius's act of exile, meant to end the prophecy, had instead launched his grandson toward a path of greatness, one that would lead him to face monsters and gods alike. The chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos and was rescued by a kind fisherman named Dictys, giving the mother and son many years of peace. The dawn was breaking over Seriphos, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, when Dictys first spotted the weathered oak chest caught in the shallows. His nets were heavy with the morning's catch, but something about the chest, its stubborn refusal to be claimed by the tide, drew him closer. He waded into the cool water, his calloused hands gripping the sodden wood, and with the help of a few neighbors, he dragged it onto the white sands of the beach. The chest was sealed tight, its pitch-dark surface scarred by the sea's embrace, but faint sounds came from within, a soft murmur that quickened Dictys's heart. When he pried open the lid, he found Danae, her face pale but resolute, cradling a small boy whose bright eyes blinked against the sudden light. She looked up at Dictys, her gaze steady despite the exhaustion etched into her features, and in that moment, the fisherman knew he could not turn away. He offered his hand, helping her from the chest, and promised her safety in a voice as gentle as the waves lapping at their feet. Thus began a new chapter for Danae and Perseus, one that unfolded under the warm sun of Seriphos, far from the cold bronze of Argos. Dictys's home was a simple place built of sun-bleached stone and driftwood, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. It smelled of salt and smoked fish, with a hearth that glowed warmly against the island's evening chill. Here Danae and Perseus found refuge, a sanctuary after the terrors of their exile. Dictys treated them as family, sharing his meager stores without hesitation, his laughter filling the small house as he taught Perseus the names of the stars that glittered above the Aegean. Danae, though marked by her ordeal, began to reclaim the light in her spirit. She wove nets alongside Dictys, her fingers nimble despite the years spent in confinement, and told stories of gods and heroes to Perseus as they sat by the fire. The boy grew strong and curious, his hair curling like his mother's, his eyes always drawn to the horizon, as if he could see the destiny waiting for him. Seriphos was a small island, its people simple folk, who lived by the rhythms of the sea, and for a time it was a haven. Perseus ran barefoot along the beaches, chasing crabs and collecting shells, his laughter mingling with the cries of gulls. The islanders, charmed by the boy's spirit, welcomed him as one of their own, though whispers of his divine origin followed him like a soft breeze. Years passed, and Perseus grew into a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a strength that belied his gentle upbringing. Dictys taught him to mend nets to read the tides, and to wield a spear for fishing. But there was a fire in Perseus that spoke of something greater. Danae watched him with a mother's pride and a mother's fear, knowing that the peace they had found was fragile, a gift that could be snatched away. And indeed, a shadow loomed over their idyllic life in the form of Polydectes, the king of Seriphos, and Dictys's older brother. Where Dictys was kind, Polydectes was cruel, his heart as hard as the cliffs that ringed the island. He ruled with an iron hand, his palace a stark contrast to the humble homes of his subjects, its marble halls filled with the spoils of his greed. Polydectes had long ignored the fisherman's home, but as Perseus grew, so did the king's interest in Danae. Her beauty, undimmed by hardship, caught his eye during a festival, where she danced with the island women, her grace outshining the torches. Polydectes desired her not as a queen, but as a prize, and his gaze lingered too long, his intentions too clear. Danae, wise to the ways of men like him, kept her distance, but Polydectes was not one to be denied. The king's desire soon turned to obsession, and he saw Perseus now, a young man of remarkable strength and spirit, as an obstacle. Polydectes was cunning, his mind as sharp as the coral reefs that guarded Seriphos's shores. He began to devise a plan, one that would rid him of the boy, while preserving his own hands from blame. The island's peace, so carefully nurtured by Dictys's kindness, began to fray under the weight of Polydectes's ambition. Perseus, unaware of the storm gathering around him, continued to roam the beaches, his heart full of dreams that stretched beyond the horizon. Danae, sensing the danger, held her son closer, her prayers to Zeus growing more fervent. The gods, it seemed, had not forgotten them, but their plans were as vast and unknowable as the sea that had carried them to this shore. The years of peace on Seriphos had been a gift, a fleeting moment of calm before the trials that would forge Perseus into the hero he was destined to become. The chest that had washed ashore had delivered them from one fate only to set them on the path to another, where monsters and divine gifts awaited. To get Perseus out of his way, King Polydectes devised a cruel plan, forcing the young man to make good on an impossible boast, to bring back the head of Medusa. The air in the palace of Seriphos was thick with the scent of wine and roasted meat. The hall alive with the clamor of a feast Polydectes had called to celebrate his supposed betrothal to a foreign princess. The islanders, dressed in their finest, gathered under the flickering torchlight, their laughter mingling with the music of lyres. Perseus, now a young man of 18, stood among them, his broad shoulders and easy grace drawing eyes. He had grown up under Dictys's care, his days filled with the honest labor of a fisherman, but there was a fire in him, a spark that spoke of his divine blood. Polydectes watched him from his gilded throne, his smile thin and sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. The king's desire for Danae had grown into an obsession, her refusals only stoking his hunger. She had rebuffed his advances with quiet dignity, her loyalty to her son, and her own heart unyielding. Perseus, fiercely protective, stood as a barrier between his mother and the king's ambitions. Polydectes knew that to claim Danae he must first remove her son, and so he wove a trap as cunning as the nets Dictys cast into the sea. The feast was a stage, every detail orchestrated to ensnare Perseus. Polydectes had announced that he sought gifts to offer his bride, urging his guests to pledge treasures worthy of a king. The islanders, eager to please, offered what they could: fine pottery, woven cloths, even a prized horse. Perseus, young and proud, felt the weight of the moment. He had no wealth to offer, no riches, save his courage and his name. When Polydectes' gaze fell upon him, the king's voice was honeyed, his words laced with challenge. "And you, Perseus," he called, silencing the hall, "what gift will the son of Danae bring to honor my union?" The question hung in the air, a baited hook. Perseus, his cheeks flushed with youth, and the heat of the wine, spoke before he could think. "I will bring you the head of Medusa," he declared, his voice ringing with defiance. A gasp rippled through the crowd, for Medusa's name was a curse, a whisper of death. The Gorgon, with her serpent hair and gaze that turned men to stone, was a creature of nightmares, her lair a place no mortal dared tread. Polydectes' smile widened, his trap sprung. "A noble boast," he said, his tone mocking. "Let it be so, then. Bring me her head, or do not return." Perseus stood frozen, the weight of his words settling over him like a storm cloud. He had spoken out of pride, out of a desire to prove himself more than a fisherman's ward, but now the reality of his vow loomed. Medusa was no mere beast. She was a monster born of divine wrath, her sisters equally fearsome, their lair hidden at the edge of the world. The hall buzzed with murmurs, some pitying, others scornful, but Danae's face was pale, her eyes locked on her son. She knew Polydectes' heart saw the cruelty behind his smile. This was no request, but a sentence, a way to rid himself of Perseus without raising a hand. Yet Perseus did not falter. He met the king's gaze, his jaw set, and nodded. "I will keep my word," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. The feast continued, but its joy was dimmed, the air heavy with the knowledge that a young man had been sent to his doom. Danae, in the quiet of their home that night, held Perseus close, her whispers fierce. "The gods will guide you," she said, her faith in Zeus unwavering. "You are their son, and they will not let you fall." As Perseus prepared to leave Seriphos, the island seemed to hold its breath. Dictys. His heart heavy, gave him a spear and a fisherman's cloak, practical gifts for a journey into the unknown. The sea, which had once carried him to safety, now watched him depart, its waves lapping at the shore as if in farewell. Perseus carried little but his courage and the weight of his promise. Polydectes' plan had been cruel, it had also awakened something in Perseus, a resolve that burned brighter than fear. He was no longer just a boy of Seriphos. He was a hero in the making, thrust onto a path where gods and monsters awaited. The boast born of youthful pride had become a quest, one that would test his strength, his wit, and his divine heritage. As he set sail, the horizon stretched before him, vast and unyielding, a reminder that the world was larger than the island he called home. Polydectes, watching from his palace, believed he had won, but the gods were not done with Perseus. The trap meant to destroy him would instead forge him, setting him on a journey that would echo through the ages, from the shores of Seriphos to the lair of the Gorgon herself. Facing a task beyond mortal means, Perseus received help from two powerful deities, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Hermes, the cunning messenger god. As Perseus stood on the shores of Seriphos, the sea stretching endlessly before him, the weight of his vow to slay Medusa pressed heavily on his shoulders. The boast made in the heat of a feast had been a spark of pride, but now it loomed as an impossible mountain, its peak shrouded in the mists of myth. Medusa, with her serpent-crowned head and gaze that turned flesh to stone, was no mere beast, but a creature of divine terror, her lair hidden beyond the maps of men. Perseus, though brave, was a mortal youth, armed only with a fisherman's spear and a heart untested by such perils. Yet the blood of Zeus flowed in his veins, and the gods, ever watchful, had not abandoned their son. As he gazed out at the horizon, the air shimmered, and a presence descended not with the thunder of a storm, but with the quiet certainty of divine will. Athena, her gray eyes sharp as polished steel, appeared before him, her armor gleaming under an unseen sun. Beside her stood Hermes, his winged sandals hovering just above the sand, a sly smile playing on his lips. They had come not to fight his battle, but to arm him for the war ahead, their gifts a bridge between mortal courage and divine destiny. Athena's voice was clear, cutting through the crash of waves like a blade through silk. She spoke of Medusa's curse, of the gods' ancient wrath that had transformed a mortal woman into a monster, her beauty twisted into horror. "You cannot face her as other men do," she warned, her words measured, each one landing like a stone in still water. "Her eyes are death, but wisdom can turn even death aside." From her hands she offered a shield, its surface polished to a mirror's sheen so bright it caught the light of the sky and flung it back. "Use this," she said, "to see without being seen." The shield was no ordinary bronze, but a gift forged in the fires of Olympus' light, yet unyielding its reflection, a weapon against the Gorgon's gaze. Perseus took it, his fingers tracing its smooth edge, feeling the weight of divine craftsmanship. Athena's gaze softened, but only slightly, for she was a goddess of strategy, not sentiment. She saw in Perseus not just a hero, but a piece on the board of fate, one she would guide but not carry. Her presence was a reminder that courage alone was not enough. Wisdom would be his truest ally. Hermes, ever the trickster, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with mischief and purpose. "A hero needs more than a shield to dance with death," he said, his voice light but laced with the cunning that had outwitted gods and mortals alike. From his belt he drew a sword, its blade forged of adamantine, a metal said to be unbreakable, its edge sharp enough to cleave through the very air. "This will cut where mortal steel fails," he promised, placing it in Perseus's hands. The sword felt alive, its balance perfect, as if it had been made for him alone. Hermes's gift was not just a weapon, but a symbol of speed and guile, qualities the young hero would need to survive the trials ahead. He clapped Perseus on the shoulder, his touch light but charged with divine energy. "You'll need to move fast, lad," he said, his grin widening. "The Gorgons aren't known for their hospitality." With a flourish, he pointed Perseus toward the west, where the sun sank into the sea, and spoke of the Graiae, 3 ancient sisters who guarded the secrets of the Gorgon's lair. "Find them," Hermes instructed, "and be clever. They're not fond of sharing." The gods' gifts were not mere tools, but a mantle of responsibility, a call to rise above the mortal boy he had been. Athena and Hermes did not linger. Their forms dissolved into the sea breeze, leaving Perseus alone with his new burdens. The shield hung heavy on his arm, the sword a cool weight at his side, and in their presence he felt the stirrings of something greater than fear, a purpose that burned brighter than doubt. He was no longer just the son of Danae, the ward of Dictys. He was a demigod chosen by the gods to face a monster that had claimed countless lives. Yet the path ahead was shrouded in mystery. The Graiae, the Stygian nymphs, the Gorgons themselves, each was a riddle, a challenge that would test not just his strength, but his wit. Athena's shield was a promise of protection, Hermes' sword a pledge of victory, but neither would wield themselves. Perseus turned his gaze to the west, where the sea met the sky, and felt the weight of his vow anew. Polydectes had sent him to die, but the gods had other plans, and their gifts were the first steps on a journey that would carve his name into legend. The fisherman's son was gone. In his place stood a hero ready to face the unknown, guided by the wisdom of Athena and the cunning of Hermes. Following their instructions, Perseus sought out the Graiai, 3 old sisters, who shared a single eye and a single tooth, to force them to reveal a secret. With Athena's polished shield slung across his back and Hermes's adamantine sword at his side, Perseus set out from Seriphos, his heart a mixture of resolve and trepidation. The gods had pointed him west beyond the known world, to a place where the earth seemed to fray at the edges, where the sea whispered of ancient things, and the air grew thick with mystery. The journey was long, the waves carrying him past islands uncharted by mortal sailors, through mists that clung like spiderwebs and winds that sang of forgotten places. Perseus, alone in his small boat, felt the weight of his divine gifts, their presence a constant reminder of the task ahead. The Graiai Hermes had said were creatures of neither god nor mortal, born of the sea's primal depths, their wisdom as vast as it was guarded. They knew the path to the Gorgon's lair, a secret no mortal had ever pried from them. Perseus's task was to outwit these ancient beings, to turn their own strangeness against them, and he felt the spark of Hermes's cunning kindle within him as he sailed toward the unknown. The land where he finally made shore was bleak, a jagged coast, where cliffs rose like the bones of the earth, their surfaces pitted by salt and time. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of decay, and the sky above seemed to press down, as if reluctant to let light touch the ground. Perseus climbed the rocky slopes, his sandals slipping on loose stones, until he reached a cave mouth that gaped like a wound in the cliffside. Inside, the air was damp, the darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the torch he lit. The Graiai were there, their presence announced by a low guttural muttering that echoed off the walls. Perseus crept forward, his heart pounding, until he saw them. 3 hags, their forms hunched and gnarled, their skin like withered leather. They sat in a circle, passing a single eye between them, its milky surface glinting in the torchlight, as they took turns peering at the world. A single tooth, yellowed and sharp, was handed back and forth, their voices a chorus of complaints and riddles. "Who's there?" one croaked, her empty sockets turning toward the sound of Perseus's breath. "A thief, a thief," another hissed, clutching the eye. The third cackled, gnashing the tooth. "He seeks what we guard sisters, but he'll find only death." Perseus, guided by Hermes's cunning, held his silence, watching, as the sisters bickered over their shared eye. He saw his chance when the eye was passed again, one sister fumbling as she reached for it. With a swiftness born of desperation, he darted forward, snatching the eye from midair. The Graiai's shrieks filled the cave, a sound like breaking stone, their hands clawing at the air. "Give it back, mortal," they wailed, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of rage and fear. Perseus held the eye high, its weight surprisingly light, its surface warm and slick. "Tell me the way to the Stygian nymphs," he demanded, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Tell me, or your eye will never see again." The sisters hissed and spat, their words venomous, but Perseus stood firm, Athena's wisdom tempering his resolve. He knew the Graiai's power lay in their knowledge, but their weakness was their dependence on that single eye. Without it, they were blind, helpless, their secrets vulnerable. The sisters snarled, their hands groping blindly, but the loss of their eye was a wound too deep. "The nymphs dwell where the river Styx meets the sea," one finally spat, her voice dripping with malice. "Seek them in the shadow of the world's edge, where the light dies." Perseus clutching the eye backed toward the cave's entrance, his gaze never leaving the gray eye. They lunged toward him, their movements clumsy without their shared sight, their curses echoing in his ears. He tossed the eye into a crevice as he fled, ensuring they could not follow their wails fading into the wind. The secret was his, but the victory was bittersweet, for the path to the Stygian nymphs was no less perilous than the one he had already walked. The Graia's words had given him direction, but the world's edge was a place of myth where mortal courage alone would not suffice. As he returned to his boat, the shield and sword gleaming in the faint light, Perseus felt the gods' presence lingering their gifts, a lifeline, in a journey growing ever darker. The Graia had been his first true test, a challenge of wit rather than strength, and he had prevailed. Yet the true trial lay ahead where the nymphs awaited with the tools to face Medusa herself. The sea stretched before him once more, its waves carrying him toward the next step, in a quest that would define him, a mortal daring to walk the paths of gods and monsters. From the nymphs, Perseus received his legendary equipment, the artifacts that would allow him to confront a monster with a petrifying gaze. The sea had carried him far from the Graia's desolate cave through waters that grew darker and colder until he reached a shore where the river Styx was said to meet the sea. The air here was heavy, charged with an eerie stillness, as if the world itself held its breath. The landscape was a twilight realm where the sun's light barely touched the ground and shadows clung to the rocks like living things. Perseus stepped ashore, his heart pounding Athena's shield, a reassuring weight on his arm. Hermes' sword, a steady presence at his side. The Graia's directions had been cryptic, but their words had led him here to the edge of the mortal world where the Stygian nymphs dwelt. These were no ordinary beings. They were daughters of the underworld's rivers, their forms shimmering like water caught in moonlight. Their voices a soft murmur that blended with the lapping of the waves. Perseus called out to them, his voice echoing in the stillness, and the air shimmered as three figures emerged from the mist, their eyes ancient and knowing their presence both beautiful and unsettling. They did not speak at first, merely watched him, as if weighing his worth against the task he bore. The nymphs knew of his quest for the gods, had whispered of it in the halls of Olympus. They saw the spark of Zeus in his eyes, the resolve of a mortal tempered by divine blood, and they nodded, their movements fluid like ripples on a pond. "You seek to face the Gorgon," one said, her voice a melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "No mortal can stand before her gaze and live. But we will arm you, son of Zeus, for the gods have willed it." From the shadows they brought forth treasures forged in the depths of the divine artifacts that gleamed with power no mortal hand could craft. The first was a pair of winged sandals, their leather soft as a whisper, their golden wings quivering as if alive. "These will carry you over land and sea," the nymphs said, fastening them to Perseus's feet. He felt a lightness, a buoyancy, as if the earth itself could no longer hold him. With a tentative step, he rose, hovering above the ground, the sandals responding to his will as if they were an extension of his body. The sensation was exhilarating, a promise of freedom that made the vast world seem within reach. Next, they presented the helm of darkness, a cap woven from shadows, its surface shifting like smoke. This was no mere trinket, but a gift from Hades himself, lent for this quest by the will of the gods. "Wear this, and you will walk unseen," the nymphs instructed, placing it in his hands. Perseus held it, feeling its strange weight, neither heavy nor light, as if it existed between worlds. He donned it briefly, and the world dimmed, the nymphs' forms fading, as if he had stepped into another realm. The helm was a cloak of invisibility, a tool to slip past the Gorgon's watchful eyes, its power as chilling as it was exhilarating. The final gift was the kybeisis, a bag crafted of silver and sinew, its mouth sealed with a cord that pulsed with divine energy. This will hold the head of Medusa. The nymphs said, their voices grave. Her gaze will not lose its power in death. Guard it well. The bag was light, yet it seemed to hum with purpose, its interior vast enough to contain a monster's curse. Perseus slung it over his shoulder, its presence a reminder of the task's danger, a burden he could not yet fully comprehend. With Athena's shield, Hermes's sword, and now the nymph's gifts, Perseus stood transformed, no longer a mere youth, but a hero armed for a divine quest. The nymphs stepped back, their forms dissolving into the mist, their voices lingering like an echo. Go now, they said, to the ends of the earth, where the Gorgons dwell. Trust in the gods, but trust in your own heart as well. Perseus felt the weight of their words, the gravity of the path ahead. The winged sandals lifted him above the rocky shore, the helm and kybeisis secure at his side, and he turned his gaze to the horizon, where the world fell away into shadow. The artifacts were more than tools. They were a mantle of destiny, a sign that the gods had chosen him to face a terror no mortal had survived. Yet even with their gifts, the task was his alone to complete. The nymphs had given him the means to challenge Medusa, but it was his courage, his wit, that would decide his fate. As he rose into the air, the sea stretching beneath him, Perseus felt the stirrings of a hero's heart, ready to face the monster, whose name was a whisper of death, armed with the tools of gods, but driven by the will of a man. Fully equipped, Perseus flew to the ends of the earth, where he found the lair of the three Gorgon sisters, monsters, with hair of snakes and wings of gold. The winged sandals, a gift from the Stygian nymphs, carried him high above the sea, their golden feathers humming with divine energy as they bore him through clouds and over waves that stretched into infinity. The world below grew strange, the familiar greens and blues of the mortal realm, giving way to a landscape of jagged stone and ashen skies, where the air itself seemed to pulse with an ancient dread. Perseus clutched Athena's polished shield, close its mirror-like surface reflecting the dim light, while Hermes's adamantine sword hung at his side, its edge gleaming with promise. The helm of darkness rested in his pack alongside the kybeisis, the silver bag meant to contain Medusa's head. Each artifact was a lifeline, a thread tying him to the gods who had armed him for this impossible task. Yet as he flew, the weight of his quest pressed against him, heavier than the shield or sword. Medusa was no mere beast. She was a creature of divine curse, her gaze a death sentence, her sisters equally monstrous. The Grae had pointed him here to this forsaken place where the earth seemed to recoil from itself, and now as he descended, the reality of his vow loomed larger than ever. The Gorgon's lair was a cavern carved into a cliff face, its entrance a gaping maw framed by rocks that glistened like wet bone. The air was thick with the stench of decay, mingled with a metallic tang that set Perseus's teeth on edge. He landed softly, the winged sandals silent against the stone, and donned the helm of darkness. The world dimmed his form, cloaked in shadow, rendering him invisible even to the keen senses of the Gorgons. He crept forward, his heart pounding so loudly he feared it might betray him. The cavern's interior was vast, its walls studded with stalactites that dripped with moisture, each drop echoing like a warning. In the dim light, he saw them, the three Gorgon sisters, their forms both beautiful and grotesque. Their wings, shimmering gold, were folded against their backs, catching what little light penetrated the cave. Their hair writhed, a mass of serpents that hissed and snapped, each one a living nightmare. Stheno and Euryale, immortal and unyielding, lounged on slabs of stone, their claws tapping rhythmically, their eyes glinting with malice. But it was Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, who drew Perseus's gaze. She lay apart, her form curled in sleep, her serpent hair coiling lazily around her face. Even in repose, her beauty was haunting a cruel mockery of the woman she had once been before Athena's curse transformed her into a monster. Perseus's breath caught his grip tightening on the shield. The stories had not prepared him for this. Medusa's face, even softened by sleep, was a paradox, lovely yet lethal, her closed eyes hiding the gaze that could turn him to stone. The serpents stirred, sensing something amiss, their hisses rising like a chorus of warnings. Perseus moved slowly, his every step deliberate, the helm of darkness cloaking his presence. He held Athena's shield before him, angling it to catch Medusa's reflection, knowing that to meet her eyes directly was to invite death. The cave was silent, save for the drip of water and the soft rustle of the Gorgon's wings, but the air thrummed with danger, as if the very stones knew what was to come. Perseus's mind raced, Athena's wisdom guiding his thoughts. He could not afford a mistake. One glance, one misstep, and he would join the countless statues that littered the cavern's floor, their faces frozen in terror. Some were warriors, their swords raised in futile defiance. Others were travelers caught unawares, their stone eyes wide with shock. Each was a testament to Medusa's power, a reminder of the stakes of his quest. He edged closer, his sandals silent, the sword in his hand steady, despite the tremor in his chest. Medusa's breathing was slow, her serpents quieter now, as if lulled by her sleep. Perseus positioned himself carefully, using the shield to track her reflection, her form clear in its polished surface. The other Gorgons stirred their claws, scraping against stone, but they did not wake their immortal senses, dulled by the cave's oppressive stillness. Perseus knew this was his moment, the fleeting chance the gods had granted him. He raised the adamantine sword, its blade catching a stray beam of light, and whispered a prayer to Athena and Hermes. With a single fluid motion, he struck the sword, slicing through the air and severing Medusa's head in one clean blow. The serpents shrieked, their cries echoing through the cave, but it was too late. Medusa's body slumped, and from her neck sprang two creatures born of her divine curse, Pegasus, the winged horse, its coat gleaming white, and Chrysaor, a giant wielding a golden sword. They burst forth, their forms vanishing into the cavern's depths, leaving Perseus with the head, its eyes mercifully closed. He seized the cabesus, thrusting the head inside, its weight heavier than he expected, as if the curse itself had mass. The other Gorgons awoke, their screams a deafening cacophony, their wings beating as they lunged toward the sound of the strike. But the helm of darkness hid Perseus, and the winged sandals lifted him swiftly from the cave, the air rushing past as he soared into the sky. The Gorgons' cries faded behind him, their pursuit futile against his divine gifts. Perseus clutched the cabesus tightly, the head within a dangerous prize, its power undiminished even in death. The lair of the Gorgons receded below a place of nightmares now behind him, but the weight of his victory was tempered by the trials still to come. The gods had armed him, guided him, but it was his hand that had struck the blow, his courage that had faced the monster. As he flew back toward the world of men, the artifacts at his side, and Medusa's head in his grasp, Perseus felt the stirrings of a hero's legacy, one forged in the shadow of divine will and mortal daring. Gazing at her reflection, in Athena's shield, to avoid her direct gaze, Perseus swung his sword and severed the head of Medusa as she slept. The cavern of the Gorgons was a place of dread, its air thick with the chill of ancient curses, its walls glistening with moisture that seemed to weep for the doomed. Perseus, cloaked in the helm of darkness, moved like a shadow through the darkness, his winged sandals silent against the stone floor. The shield, polished to a mirror's sheen by Athena's divine hand, was his guide, its surface catching the faint light that seeped into the cave and reflecting the forms of the three Gorgon sisters. Stheno and Euryale, immortal and fierce, lay sprawled on slabs of rock, their golden wings folded their serpent hair, hissing softly in their sleep. But it was Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, who held Perseus's attention. She rested apart her body, curled on a bed of stone, her face serene yet haunting, a beauty marred by the writhing snakes that crowned her head. Her eyes were closed, a mercy that spared Perseus from their petrifying gaze, but the danger was no less real. The cave was a graveyard of stone figures, warriors and wanderers frozen in their final moments, their faces etched with terror or defiance. Each was a warning, a testament to Medusa's power, and Perseus felt the weight of their silent screams as he crept closer, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. He held the shield before him, angling it carefully to capture Medusa's reflection, her form clear in its polished surface. The serpents stirred their hisses, rising like a chorus of whispers, as if sensing the intruder even in their mistress's sleep. Perseus's breath came in shallow bursts, each one measured to keep his presence hidden. The helm of darkness cloaked him from sight, but the Gorgon's senses were not wholly mortal, and a single misstep could rouse them. Hermes's adamantine sword was heavy in his hand, its blade gleaming with a light that seemed to come from within a gift forged for this very moment. Perseus positioned himself beside Medusa, his eyes locked on her reflection, never daring to look directly at her face. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic, the serpents quieter now, as if lulled by her dreams. The cave's silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of water from stalactites and the faint rustle of the Gorgon's wings. Perseus's mind raced Athena's wisdom, guiding his movements, her voice a distant echo in his thoughts, see without being seen. The shield was his lifeline, its reflection, his only safe path through this dance with death. He raised the sword, its edge catching a stray beam of light, and whispered a prayer to the gods who had armed him. Athena's shield, Hermes's sword, the nymph's gifts, they were extensions of his will, but the act was his alone. His muscles tensed, his grip steady despite the tremor in his chest. Medusa's reflection lay still, her face almost human in its repose, a tragic reminder of the woman she had been before divine wrath transformed her. Perseus hesitated for a heartbeat, not out of fear, but out of a fleeting pity, a recognition of the curse that bound her as much as it threatened him. But the moment passed, and with a single fluid motion, he swung the sword, its blade slicing through the air with a whisper. The cut was clean, the adamantine edge parting flesh and bone as if they were air. Medusa's head fell, her serpents shrieking in a cacophony that shattered the cave's silence. Her body slumped, and from her severed neck sprang two beings born of her divine curse, Pegasus, a winged horse with a coat like moonlight, and Chrysaor, a giant clutching a golden sword. They burst forth, their forms vanishing into the cavern's depths, leaving Perseus with the head, its eyes mercifully closed, its power undiminished even in death. The other Gorgons awoke, their screams a deafening roar that shook the cave, their wings beating as they lunged toward the sound of the strike. Perseus, still cloaked by the helm of darkness, seized the cabesus, thrusting Medusa's head inside its weight, heavier than he expected, as if the curse itself had substance. The bag's silver cords sealed tight, containing the head's deadly gaze. Stheno and Euryale's claws scraped against stone, their eyes blazing with fury, but they could not see him. The winged sandals lifted him swiftly, carrying him upward through the cavern's mouth and into the ashen sky. The Gorgon's cries faded behind him, their pursuit thwarted by his divine gifts. He clutched the cabesus tightly, the head within a dangerous trophy, its power a constant threat. The cavern receded below a place of nightmares now conquered, but the victory was not without cost. Perseus's hands trembled as he flew, the weight of what he had done settling over him. He had faced a monster not with brute strength, but with the cunning and wisdom the gods had granted him. The shield had been his eyes, the sword his hand, and the helm his shield against death. Yet as he soared over the sea, the world stretching beneath him, he knew the quest was not over. The head of Medusa was his prize, but it was also a burden, a weapon that could turn friend as well as foe to stone. The gods had guided him to this moment, but the path back to Seriphos and the trials that awaited would test him further, forging the fisherman's son into a hero whose name would echo through the ages. On his way home, he saw a tragic sight, the Princess Andromeda chained to a rock, waiting to be sacrificed to a sea monster. Perseus soared through the skies, the winged sandals carrying him swiftly over the vast expanse of the sea, the cabesus with Medusa's head secured tightly at his side. The weight of his victory over the Gorgon lingered, a mix of triumph and unease, for the head was no mere trophy, but a weapon of unimaginable power. The helm of darkness rested in his pack, Athena's shield gleamed on his arm, and Hermes' sword hung ready, each artifact a reminder of the gods' trust in him. The world below stretched endlessly, a tapestry of waves and distant shores, but as he flew toward Seriphos, a strange sight caught his eye. Far below, on a jagged coastline where cliffs rose like sentinels against the sea, a lone figure stood bound to a rock, her form outlined against the crashing waves. Perseus descended the sandals, slowing his flight, and as he drew closer, he saw her clearly, a young woman, her dark hair whipped by the wind, her wrists bound by heavy chains that gleamed cruelly in the sunlight. Her face was pale but resolute, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sea churned with an unnatural fury. The air carried the faint roar of something monstrous, a sound that sent a chill through even Perseus's battle-hardened heart. He landed softly on the cliff's edge, the helm of darkness keeping him unseen, and studied the scene. The woman was Andromeda, princess of Ethiopia, though he did not yet know her name. Her garments, though torn by the wind and salt, spoke of royalty, their once fine fabric clinging to her like a fading echo of her status. The chains were not merely restraints, but a deliberate cruelty bolted into the rock with a precision that suggested ritual. Perseus's gaze followed hers to the sea, where the waves parted, to reveal a creature rising from the depths. It was a beast of nightmare, its scales glinting like oil, its jaws wide enough to swallow a man whole, its eyes burning with a hunger that was both primal and divine. This was no ordinary sea monster, but a servant of Poseidon sent to punish the land for the hubris of Andromeda's mother, Queen Cassiopeia, who had boasted that her daughter's beauty surpassed that of the sea nymphs. The gods, ever jealous of their honor, had demanded a price, and Andromeda was to be the sacrifice her life offered to appease the wrath of the sea. The monster's roar shook the cliffs, and Andromeda's shoulders tensed, but she did not cry out her courage, a quiet fire that burned despite her chains. Perseus felt a surge of anger, not at the monster, but at the injustice of her fate. He had faced Medusa, a creature cursed by the gods, and now he saw another victim of divine whims, a woman bound not by her own actions, but by the pride of another. The gods had armed him for one quest, but his heart, shaped by Danae's compassion and Dictys's kindness, could not turn away from this. He removed the helm of darkness, revealing himself, and called out to Andromeda. Her eyes widened, fear giving way to surprise as she saw the young man with his gleaming shield and winged sandals. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her lips. "I am Perseus," he replied, his tone firm, "and I will not let you die." The monster was closer now, its massive form breaking the surface, its tail lashing the waves into a frenzy. Perseus had no time for plans, only action. He drew Hermes' sword, its adamantine blade flashing, and leapt into the air, the winged sandals carrying him over the churning sea. Andromeda's gaze followed him, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes, though the chains held her fast. The battle was swift and brutal. The monster lunged its jaws, snapping, but Perseus was faster, his sandals darting him out of reach. He struck with the sword, slicing through scales that should have been impenetrable, the blade's divine edge parting them like water. The creature roared, its blood darkening the sea, but it was relentless, driven by Poseidon's will. Perseus, guided by Athena's wisdom, used the shield not as a defense but as a lure, angling it to catch the beast's reflection when confusing its aim. He dove and struck again, each blow precise until the monster's movements slowed its strength, ebbing with its life. With a final thrust, he drove the sword into its eye, and the beast sank, its body claimed by the waves it had once ruled. Perseus returned to the cliff, his breath ragged, his sword dripping with dark blood. Andromeda watched him, her face a mix of awe and gratitude. He shattered her chains with a single blow of the sword, freeing her from the rock, and she fell into his arms, not as a princess, but as a woman who had faced death and lived. The people of Ethiopia, watching from the shore, erupted in cheers, their voices carrying over the now calm sea. Andromeda's parents, King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, rushed to her, their joy tempered by shame for the fate they had allowed. Perseus, though weary, stood tall, the hero's mantle settling more firmly on his shoulders. Andromeda's eyes met his, and in them he saw not just gratitude but a strength that matched his own. This was no mere side quest, no distraction from his journey home. It was a moment that defined him, a choice to act not for glory but for justice. As he prepared to leave Andromeda at his side, the cabezus still heavy with Medusa's head, Perseus knew that his journey was far from over. The sea monster was slain, but Seriphos and Polydectes awaited, and with them the final reckoning of his quest. The gods had guided him, but it was his heart that had led him to Andromeda, forging a bond that would shape the rest of his tale. After slaying the sea monster and rescuing Andromeda, Perseus returned to Seriphos and confronted the evil king, turning him and his entire court to stone with the very gift he had demanded. The winged sandals carried Perseus and Andromeda high above the sea, the wind rushing past as they left the cliffs of Ethiopia, behind the cheers of her people fading into the distance. The cabezus hung heavy at his side, Medusa's head a dangerous burden, its power sealed within the silver bag but ever present in his mind. Athena's shield gleamed on his arm, Hermes' sword rested at his hip, and the helm of darkness was tucked safely in his pack, each artifact a testament to the trials he had overcome. Andromeda, her dark eyes bright with gratitude and resolve, clung to him as they flew, her presence a new strength that steadied his heart. The journey to Seriphos was swift, the sandals cutting through clouds and over waves, but Perseus's thoughts were heavy with purpose. Polydectes, the cruel king, who had sent him to his doom, awaited, and with him the mother who had raised Perseus in exile, Danae, whose safety had driven him to face the Gorgon. The island appeared on the horizon, its white sands and green hills, a stark contrast to the dark caverns and monstrous seas he had left behind. Yet it held its own dangers, its own injustices that demanded reckoning. As they landed on the shores of Seriphos, the familiar scent of salt and olive trees greeted Perseus, but there was no joy in his homecoming. The island, once a haven, was now a battlefield, its peace poisoned by Polydectes' greed. Perseus learned from whispers among the fishermen that Danae had been hounded by the king in his absence, her refusals met with threats and confinement. Dictys, the kind fisherman who had raised him, had done what he could to protect her, but his power was limited against his brother's throne. Perseus's blood burned with anger, the memory of Polydectes' mocking smile at the feast fueling his resolve. He bid Andromeda stay with Dictys, promising to return, and donned the helm of darkness to approach the palace unseen. The marble halls, once a place of feigned festivity, now stood as a monument to Polydectes' cruelty, their opulence a mask for the suffering he inflicted. Perseus slipped through the gates, his steps silent the cabesus, a heavy weight in his hands. The court was gathered in the great hall, Polydectes on his gilded throne, his advisors and sycophants arrayed around him, their laughter sharp and hollow. Danae was there, her face pale but defiant, her wrists bound by silken cords, a prisoner in all but name. Perseus removed the helm, revealing himself at the hall's center, his sudden appearance silencing the room. The courtiers gasped, their eyes wide with fear and recognition, for the boy who had left was now a man armed with the aura of a hero who had faced death and returned. Polydectes leaned forward, his smile thin and venomous. "So the fisherman's son returns," he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Have you brought me my gift, or do you come to beg forgiveness for your failure?" Perseus's gaze was steady, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I have brought what you demanded," he said, his hand resting on the cabesus. The courtiers murmured, their curiosity tinged with unease, for the tale of Medusa was known even here, a whisper of terror that chilled the boldest hearts. Polydectes laughed a harsh sound that echoed off the marble. "Show me then," he demanded, leaning back, his eyes glinting with the belief that Perseus had failed, that the boy's boast was empty. It was the moment Perseus had waited for, the culmination of his journey, the chance to turn the king's cruelty against him. He drew the cabesus open, his movements deliberate, and lifted Medusa's head by its writhing serpents, careful to keep its eyes turned away from himself. The hall fell silent, the air thick with dread, as he raised the head high. "Behold your gift," he said, and turned it toward Polydectes. The king's smirk froze his eyes, meeting the Gorgon's gaze, and in an instant his flesh hardened to stone, his expression locked in a mask of shock and arrogance. The courtiers screamed, scrambling to flee, but Perseus swept the head across the room, its petrifying gaze catching each one in turn. One by one they turned to statues, their silks and jewels frozen in place, their faces a gallery of fear and greed. The hall became a mausoleum, the air heavy with the silence of stone. Danae, untouched by the gaze, ran to her son, her bonds falling away, as Perseus cut them with his sword. She embraced him, her tears warm against his shoulder, her pride a quiet strength that matched his own. The cabesus was sealed once more, its deadly contents secured, but its work was done. Perseus led Danae from the hall, the weight of his victory settling over him. Polydectes' tyranny was ended, his court a monument to his own hubris. Dictys, summoned to the palace, was declared king by the islanders who hailed Perseus as their deliverer. The fisherman's humble heart accepted the crown with reluctance, but his rule promised the peace that Polydectes had stolen. Perseus, with Andromeda and Danae at his side, stood on the shores of Seriphos, the sea stretching before them, a reminder of the journey that had brought him here. The gods had guided him, their gifts had armed him, but it was his courage, his love for his mother, that had driven him to face Medusa and return. The head, now a tool of justice, had fulfilled its purpose, but its power remained a shadow that would follow him. As he looked to the horizon, Perseus knew his tale was not yet complete, for fate had one final thread to weave, one that would tie him back to the prophecy that had set his journey in motion. Years later, at an athletic competition, Perseus accidentally threw a discus that struck an old man in the crowd, and that man was none other than King Acrisius. The years following Perseus's triumph on Seriphos had been kind, a tapestry of peace woven from the threads of his heroic deeds. With Polydectes turned to stone and Dictys-crowned King Seriphos flourished under a just rule, its shores alive with the laughter of fishermen and the songs of free hearts. Perseus, now a man in his prime, had taken Andromeda as his wife, her strength and grace a match for his own. Together they built a life, their love a beacon that drew the islanders' admiration. Danae, freed from the shadow of her past, lived with them, her eyes bright with pride for the son who had defied fate to save her. Yet the world beyond Seriphos called to Perseus, the blood of Zeus stirring in his veins, urging him to seek new horizons. He and Andromeda journeyed to Argos, the land of his birth, not to claim its throne, but to see the place where his mother's tale had begun, where a bronze chamber had once held her captive. The gods, it seemed, watched still their plans, as vast and unknowable as the sea that had carried him to safety as a child. Argos was a city of stone and memory, its walls high and its markets bustling, but it was ruled by a shadow of its former king. Acrisius, grown old and weary, had fled the city years before, haunted by the prophecy that his grandson would be his doom. He wandered in exile, his crown passed to another, his name a whisper of fear among those who remembered his cruelty. Perseus, unaware of his grandfather's fate, arrived in Argos as a hero, his deeds preceding him like a herald. The people welcomed him, their cheers echoing through the streets, for the tale of Medusa's slaying had spread far, carried on the wings of rumor and song. Perseus, ever humble, sought not glory but connection, a chance to walk the land his mother had described in her stories. It was during a festival in a neighboring city, a grand athletic competition held to honor the gods, that fate wove its final thread. The fields were alive with the clamor of athletes and spectators, the air thick with the scent of olive oil and dust, the sun high and unforgiving. Perseus, invited to compete, joined the discus throw, his strength honed by years of labor and battle, his heart light with the joy of the moment. The discus was heavy in his hands, its bronze surface warm from the sun, its weight familiar yet challenging. Perseus stood at the edge of the field, his muscles coiling as he prepared his throw. The crowd watched, their voices a low hum, Andromeda among them, her smile a quiet encouragement. He spun his body a blur of motion and released the discus, sending it soaring through the air, a gleaming arc against the blue sky. But the wind, or perhaps the hand of fate, turned the discus from its path. It veered swift and unyielding toward the crowd. Gasps rose, bodies scattered, but one figure, an old man cloaked in worn robes, moved too slowly. The discus struck him a sickening thud that silenced the festival. Perseus froze, his breath caught, as the crowd parted to reveal the fallen man, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. Blood seeped into the dust, and as Perseus rushed forward, a terrible recognition dawned. The old man was Acrisius, his grandfather, drawn to the games by chance or destiny. His exile ended in the very moment he had feared all his life. The oracle's prophecy, spoken so long ago in the shadowed halls of Delphi, had come to pass. Acrisius, who had locked his daughter in a bronze chamber, who had cast her and her infant son into the sea, now lay dead by Perseus's hand, an accident born of sport, but sealed by fate. Perseus knelt beside him, his hands trembling, the weight of the moment heavier than Medusa's head had ever been. The crowd was silent, their eyes on the hero, who had become unwittingly the instrument of an ancient decree. Andromeda joined him, her hand on his shoulder, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of his grief. Danae, summoned from Argos, arrived to see her father's body, her face a mask of sorrow and resignation. She had no love for the man who had betrayed her, yet his death was a wound, a reminder of the prophecy that had shaped their lives. Perseus, his heart heavy, spoke no words of triumph, only a quiet prayer to the gods who had guided him. The discus, meant for glory, had become a tool of fate, its flight the final act in a drama begun before his birth. The people of Argos, moved by the tragedy, offered Perseus the throne, but he refused, his heart too raw for such ambition. He and Andromeda returned to Seriphos, where Dictys ruled with wisdom, and there they raised their children, their lives a testament to love and resilience. The artifacts of his quest, Athena's shield, Hermes' sword, the winged sandals and the helm of darkness, were returned to the gods, their purpose fulfilled. The cabysus with Medusa's head was given to Athena, who placed it upon her aegis, a symbol of divine power. Perseus's name lived on not just in Argos, but across the world, a hero whose deeds had defied monsters and gods alike. Yet the prophecy's fulfillment left a mark, a reminder that even heroes cannot outrun fate. As he stood on the shores of Seriphos, Andromeda at his side, the sea stretching before them, Perseus understood the truth of his journey. Courage could conquer monsters. Love could defy tyranny, but destiny was a tide no man could hold back. And that is the story of Perseus, the first hero, a legend of courage, divine intervention, and an unshakable truth: you can run from your enemies, but you can never run from your destiny. The tale of Perseus, born from a prophecy and forged in trials, echoes across the ages, a beacon of heroism that lights the path for all who follow. He stood on the shores of Seriphos, the sea stretching before him, its waves whispering the memories of his journey. Beside him was Andromeda, her hand in his, her eyes reflecting the strength that had bound them through monster and storm. Danae, his mother, stood nearby, her face etched with the lines of a life marked by exile and triumph, her pride in her son, a quiet fire that warmed the evening air. The island, once a place of refuge, then a stage for Polydectes' cruelty, now flourished under Dictys' gentle rule, its people free from the shadow of tyranny. Perseus' deeds, slaying Medusa, rescuing Andromeda, and fulfilling the prophecy that had haunted his grandfather, had woven his name into the fabric of myth, a story told by poets and sung by bards under starlit skies. Yet as he gazed at the horizon, the weight of his journey settled over him, not as a burden, but as a mantle, a legacy that spoke of courage, love, and the inexorable pull of fate. His journey had begun not with his own ambition, but with the fear of a king, Acrisius, whose attempt to defy the oracle's prophecy had set everything in motion. The bronze chamber meant to imprison Danae had instead invited Zeus's golden light, birthing a demigod, whose life would challenge the very gods who shaped it. Cast into the sea in a wooden chest, Perseus and his mother Palmyra had found salvation on Seriphos, only to face new threats in Polydectes' greed. The boast to bring back Medusa's head, born of youthful pride, had been a trap, yet it became the crucible that forged a hero. Guided by Athena's wisdom and Hermes' cunning, armed with divine gifts, the winged sandals, the helm of darkness, the cabysus, the shield and the sword, Perseus had faced the Gorgon, a creature whose gaze was death itself. His victory was not just a triumph of strength, but of wit, a testament to the balance of mortal courage and divine aid. The birth of Pegasus and Chrysaor from Medusa's severed neck had been a moment of wonder, a reminder that even in death the divine could create. The head sealed in the cabysus had become a weapon of justice, turning Polydectes and his court to stone, freeing Seriphos from its oppressor. Andromeda's rescue was a chapter of its own, a moment where Perseus's heart, not just his sword, defined him. Chained to a rock, facing a sea monster born of divine wrath, she had been a victim of another's hubris, much like Danae had been. Perseus's choice to save her, to wield his divine gifts, not for glory, but for compassion, marked him as more than a slayer of monsters. Their bond, forged in that moment of peril, grew into a love that sustained them through the years, a partnership of equals who faced the world together. The return to Argos, the land of his birth, had been a pilgrimage, a chance to connect with the mother who had raised him in exile. Yet it was there in the dust of an athletic field that fate closed its circle. The discus thrown in sport had found Acrisius the grandfather, who had tried to erase him, fulfilling the prophecy in a moment of tragic irony. Perseus had not sought his grandfather's death yet. It came by his hand a reminder that destiny, like the sea, follows its own currents, indifferent to mortal desires. The gods ever present in his tale were both allies and architects of his path. Athena's shield had been his eyes, Hermes' sword his strength, the nymphs' gifts his wings. Yet it was Perseus's choices, his loyalty to Danae, his courage before Medusa, his compassion for Andromeda, that made him a hero. The artifacts now returned to the gods were symbols of divine favor, but the legacy was his own. Athena placed Medusa's head upon her aegis, a mark of triumph shared with the hero who had wielded it. Perseus's children with Andromeda would carry his bloodline, their descendants shaping the myths of Greece from the kings of Mycenae to the heroes of later tales. His story became a template, a map for those who would face their own monsters, their own prophecies. It spoke of glory, yes, but also of tragedy, for no hero escapes the shadow of fate. Acrisius had run from his, locking his daughter away, casting his grandson into the sea, yet fate had found him. Perseus, too, had run not from fear, but toward duty, toward love, and found that destiny was not a foe to be outwitted, but a tide to be navigated. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sea in hues of fire, Perseus stood with his family, the weight of his journey a quiet presence. The prophecy was fulfilled, the monsters slain, the tyrant vanquished, but the truth of his tale lingered. Courage could conquer, love could endure, but destiny was unyielding. His name would live on, carried by the winds, whispered in the halls of temples, sung in the firelight of hearths. He was Perseus, the first hero, the slayer of Medusa, the savior of Andromeda, the unwitting hand of fate. His story was a song of triumph and loss of divine gifts and mortal will. A reminder that while enemies could be faced, destiny could only be met. And so, as the stars began to gleam above Seriphos, Perseus turned from the sea. His heart full, his legacy sealed a hero whose light would shine through the ages, illuminating the eternal dance of courage and fate. And so, dear friends, we leave Perseus standing on the shores of Seriphos, his legend sealed by courage and fate. Medusa's curse is broken, but destiny's shadow lingers, a reminder that no hero escapes its grasp. The stars above whisper his name, a tale of triumph and tragedy. Thank you for joining us on Sleep Stories TV. If this story stirred your heart, subscribe and tap the bell. Until next time, let the myths guide your dreams.